Hey, welcome everybody. This is Pastured Poultry Talk, episode 109. This is the final episode in my introductory training series to Pastured Poultry. And it's a little bit special, a little bit different. I teamed up with Spence to take questions via a live stream that we streamed out to Facebook. And in this episode, I've just included the relevant audio in the podcast, kind of as the bookend to that series. And we cover a lot of ground. We cover plucker efficiencies, chicken sausage, value adds. We make hay from chickens. We diversify into feed, pullets, egg washers, and just buckle up. It was a fun, enjoyable road and ride and conversation. Really enjoy getting a chance to talk with Spence about farming, pastured poultry, and just kind of life in general. So if you want to watch the unabridged video, you can check out the Pastured Poultry Talk YouTube channel, and you'll find it there. I'll link that in the show notes at pasturedpoultrytalk.com/109. So before we jump into the Q&A that Spence and I did, let me just summarize the pastured poultry training series that we started in episode 104. Episode 104 was pastured poultry planning and discovery. 105 was evaluating breeds for pastured poultry. 106 was 9 practical tips for feeding pastured poultry. 107 was successful brooder management for chicks and poults. And then episode 108 is perspectives on shelters and pasture management. And each one of these things kind of build upon the other. And we're going to kind of end it right there. I have lots of other episodes that talk about the marketing and the processing. So I'll link some of those processing ones in there because they're highly specific and kind of harder to cover in a broad way. So we'll just provide some resources to those items. And I wanted to really take an opportunity to kind of build off of some other stuff that's happening here in pastured poultry and kind of even from the APPPA standpoint. And that is heritage poultry. You know, we talked about the heritage in the context of raising pastured poultry throughout this series. At this point in time, I just feel that it's important that we pause for a moment and think about it and understand its role in pastured poultry, not necessarily where it's at, but where it's heritage or not. When we rely on Cobbs and Rosses or the Nicholas or the Highlines or whatever genetic company you can think of, we're really relying on the commercial companies, such as Cobb, to supply our future. They've also set the consumer preferences for the product type and the characteristics that we tend to produce to, right? Our customers tend to buy towards, right? Think big boneless breasts. And we always react to what those commercial genetic companies give us. And in terms of the genetic base, we have no say in the matter. So our production is completely reactionary to the market and to the birds that we raise. And if we're going to compete for additional market share, there's a school of thought that says we need to have a product that is relatable. Big boneless breasts, for example, or thighs or whatever you have. And that relatable product has evolved from the historical heritage breeds that were common, for Sunday dinners prior to the 50s. So much so, the heritage option has become unrelatable to many people. And for a grower, the commercial genetics offers something very important to a pastured poultry business: reliability. These birds reliably perform. The performance is repeatable and calculable, and that's very, very important. I believe deeply that a Cobb 500 raised on pasture is a radically better bird than a Cobb 500 raised in confinement. When you change the production model, you dramatically change for the better that bird and the people who eat it. The same goes for turkeys and eggs. If you don't believe that, then I question whether or not you truly know what you're doing with pastured poultry. It's a bold statement. I believe it. There's still a nagging feeling in pastured poultry's relationship that puts us in bed with multinational corporations whose primary outcome is a consolidation of the worldwide market for birds and protein. And many of the slower growing hybrids that we buy are controlled by many of the same companies, but not all of them. Don't get me wrong. There's one thing you need to know about poultry genetic suppliers. It's an inbred business. So where does that leave us? That's the big question. I personally believe there's a critical role for commercial genetics in pastured poultry. I think it's required at this point. But there is another option that puts more freedom and flexibility into the community, and that's heritage. And that freedom and flexibility has a cost. As we sit in 2020, a big cost of the heritage poultry segment is market share. Heritage can't compete with the Cornish cross or the Highlines of the world, and you shouldn't try to make it. That's the biggest mistake I see heritage poultry people make. And once you stop trying to compete with those modern hybrids, you can start focusing on building a market share for your product. Treat it like the unique product it is and build the business from there. That's easier said than done. I get that. And you might ask, what's this have to do with starting your pastured poultry journey? As you're starting out, you're going to explore different options and you're going to work to define your products and approach and customers. I think there's room to explore heritage. I think there's opportunity to grow heritage alongside the modern hybrids as two separate products, in meat bird terms anyway. The trick when you're exploring these different products and approaches is to do it in a meaningful way while not stretching yourself too thin. I actually think as the pastured poultry industry begins to commercialize and consolidate, there will be a natural uptick in the slow-growing side of the pastured model. The evolving market realities will drive that diversification. That's my crystal ball speaking. I'm suggesting more of us prepare. In order to multiply market-focused pastured poultry growers, we need a broad foundation that can represent the entire spectrum of pastured growers, from the least of our flocks to the greatest of our flocks. And breeding is a part of that broad foundation that makes for a robust, diverse, and forward-looking community. I hear the feedback. Heritage birds are hard. You may say that you can't make money or build a business unless you use commercial genetics. There are two important counterpoints you need to hear. The first one is that people are running businesses with heritage. Their business models probably look different than most of the pastured poultry farms. And when you say it can't be done, what you're really saying is, I can't do it. And this perspective is important because somebody else will say, I can do it, and they will do it. The second reality is that most startup pastured poultry farms won't be in business beyond 3 years. There certainly is an element of choosing the right production for the customers you're targeting and then marketing it correctly. However, I think a larger issue with people who struggle in their pastured poultry is simply one of literacy. They get sucked into the production grind and they never truly understand the cause and effect of their husbandry, and they never put in the time to become the marketers that they need to be. They never develop relationships with people who are smarter than them. Everything becomes a good enough approach when in reality, you need to develop deep knowledge across disciplines. You have to be better than good enough in more than one area to compete in pastured poultry in 2020. If you have a hankering for heritage and a market-focused approach, I encourage you to check out what we're doing over at APPPA. I'll link our first APPPA live stream to the show notes at pasturedpoultrytalk.com/109. Now let me pause to thank show's sponsor, Premier. Premier has been providing electric fencing, electric netting, and sheep and goat supplies. We got to get the ruminants in there somehow, right? And poultry products for 40 years. And they've tacked on expert advice how to use them because they use those products every day. So when you call Premier, you're getting good sound advice. You know, about 10 years ago, I purchased my first portable electrifiable fence from Premier. I still have that fence. I'm going to order some more. I like the heavy duty perma fences for my woods. I like to graze inside of one of those. A little taller, a little sturdier, and they're 100-foot rolls. Pieces. I've actually upgraded some earlier this year, and I just like it. It's relatively lightweight. I can still manage it myself, but Premier's poultry net, the other stuff, the longer stuff, the lighter stuff is lightweight. It's easy to move. It deters ground predators, you know, when you have it properly energized. And when you do that, when you have an electric netting and a good energizer on there with a nice high voltage and amperage running through it, it will literally protect your bottom line by keeping your flock safe. You know, and if you do need help matching your energizers to your fence, they can help you do that. So if you're looking for fences that work from the people who use them every day, contact Premier at 800-282-6631 or visit pasturedpoultrytalk.com/premier to request your informational catalog. And by all means, please tell them Mike Badger with Pastured Poultry Talk sent you. All right, thanks, Premier. Now, let me welcome Spence, the fighting farmer, back to Pastured Poultry Talk. I haven't had him on the show since he split his podcast feed and went his own way. I thought it'd be a great bookend to this introductory training course that started with episode 104, and we just fielded questions from our listeners live. People typed them in, we answered them, we gave them our best shot. And there's a lot of golden knowledge flowing out of the holler there in Northwest Arkansas. So here we go to our previously recorded Q&A between the fighting farmer and Pastured Poultry Talk. Enjoy, folks. generally speaking, are you up from where you were in volume? Have you recovered that loss?
We're actually a little ahead of where we were last year. And so we've done a lot of retail, and we started that online delivery service. I think we did an episode of the Fighting Farmer. I think I may have just said Farting Farmer.
I think that's what it sounded like.
Is it? Yeah. But yeah, so we started that in October, November. I just had a gut feeling, and I just felt it was something I should do. And boom, that set us up for COVID. So that was really good. You know, there's a big slug of that, and then everybody's kind of backing off. And now I think there's going to be another slug because everybody's panicking and with the COVID stuff now in Arkansas, and especially where we're at. And so that went really good. Something that really has made a difference is processing. So I make so much per bird because, you know, I'm in a partnership. I got all my equipment, use someone else's room inspection. We've talked about that. And essentially I got my equipment in someone else's plant, and I handle chickens, and they can continue to kill red meat. And he's an Air Force vet, really neat family and cousins and that do it down in Winslow, Arkansas. If you know where the tunnel is, if you've ever head to Northwest Arkansas, you go under the tunnel. It's up atop the tunnel. That's Winslow's, or around there. So, and if you're from Arkansas, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Everybody else is like, why is that guy talking about the tunnel? Let it go, Spence. So, but yeah, so we've done a lot of processing, and we're booked out, and I'm sure that's the same all across the country. And those processing fees, man, I mean, the difference is the amount of time I've been spending in the plant, you know, and how fast we've gotten. We upgraded to some Poultry Man equipment. This live stream brought to you by Poultry Man, Hughesville, Pennsylvania's finest pasture poultry supplier. We had so that's Mike, if y'all don't know, he sells that stuff.
Sell a plucker so I can buy some headphones.
Yeah, so he doesn't have to do duct tape. He gave me a discount. If he wouldn't have given me the discount, he could have bought new headphones. So it's your own fault, Mike. But so we got this plucker from Mike. We used to have a brand, which I'm not going to mention because I don't want to deal with that. And we always had to have a guy like bent over, keeping the heads and legs from getting stuck. And then we'd have to pick it up. It was a tub style and throw it in. And it was rated for what we were doing, but we wore that sucker out within a year and a half, 2 years, and it rusted all up. So I called Mike in a panic, and he shipped me out one. And this thing never stops. We had one that had a foot pedal that, you know, you to turn on. We thought it could, you know, like, oh, well, this Mike's is going to be, you know, there's a lot of like, I don't know, Spence, this one's okay, you know, what's this new voodoo Badger Magic you're getting? And that should be your nickname, your hashtag on Twitter, Badger Magic. Think about it.
Okay.
So
right,
yeah. But anyway, so this new one, it just always is running that we got from Mike, and that sucker has sped us up. I don't know, 75, 100 birds an hour. It is crazy how quick it is. It's really cut down on the labor. I got it high because I'm a little over 6 foot. So it has a table. We just open the door and it shoots the birds out. I take the oil gland off, hang them, and that thing has been nice. And that's really enabled us, you know. It used to be 1,200 birds was like terrible. And now 1,200 birds were done by 2, you know, and we never get started on time. Like we're always get started at 9. I mean, so we're up 250, 275.
I'm glad that worked out. You know, processing equipment has kind of been off the hook here last, you know, I don't know when it started, probably 3 months now. It's, we're about a month out, between 3 weeks and 4 weeks out of any equipment these days. So it might be slowing down, but we're not through our backlog yet. So it's hard to say. Yeah. And actually tomorrow, so what I'm going to do tomorrow is, you know, this is what happens when everybody panics.
Sorry.
I had an order from somebody, and they're trying to process birds. And I said, you know, when they ordered, I'm like, it's 3 to 3.5 weeks, you know, before we ship. And so they're pushing, trying to get an estimate, and I understand that. So I'm trying to get an estimate from the builder, the fabricator, and there was some miscommunication in what order I was talking about, because they're like, well, it'll be like Friday or Monday, and then it was like definitely going out Tuesday afternoon. I'm like, all right, cool, we can make that. And so Tuesday afternoon came, and I'm like, where's that tracking number? Like, for that order, that's going to go out next Thursday or something. Like, it's not done yet. And I'm like, and of course I panic because I've already told this person that their stuff's going to be shipped out, and we're going to try to priority mail it to get it there in time for the weekend. So I'm going to West Virginia tomorrow. It's a 7.5 hour slog. I got a 30-inch scalder, 27-inch plucker, and a table in the back of my truck. So the irony here is I'm going to West Virginia tomorrow, 7.5 hour journey one way to deliver processing equipment, going to dump it and head back. Then on Monday, I'm going back to West Virginia to pick up 750 turkeys and probably get back in town later Monday evening with turkeys. So
how old are they poults or are they
day old?
Day old.
Yep. So some of them are for distribution. For folks like, and then some I'll raise out. I should end up with about 110 in my brooder.
So if you need to buy a turkey, guy, and you're in Pennsylvania, I thought about doing turkeys this year. It just always, last year we had a shipping disaster, and I think I had 4 that survived because I had heat stress. It's terrible. But man, my ground chicken, I'm producing hundreds of pounds of ground chicken a week, mostly just from big birds. It's hard to sell especially the breast more than anything. But we can talk. We can come back to that.
Okay. You want to?
All right. So we got one from Kevin.
You want to bring on Kevin's question here?
Yeah. So he said, I had a chicken that would only walk backwards, and when it sat with its legs straight out. Can you tell me what was wrong or what that chicken had? It depends. If its neck was wry, it was stargazer. You'll see it's a genetic deficiency. Sometimes it's vitamin, where they'll start with the kind of twisted neck, and then their neck twists all the way. That's one thing it could be. It's a really weird thing when you see it, and it's never like a lot of chickens. It's usually 1 or 2, and that's just an oddball genetic thing. The other thing it could be, sat with his legs straight out. It could be like viral arthritis, or there's a whole bunch of things. That would be what Jeff would tell you. And Jeff is always right, so go with Jeff. But Jeff Maddox from Furtro. So that could be something. But, man, I feel like Mike was wondering how long it would take me to talk about necrotic enteritis. But I think there's a lot of stuff that happens to chickens' legs, like that hock joint, that comes from secondary infections started by stuff like necrotic enteritis, cocci, anything that damages the gut, any poultry disease that damages the gut. I think it allows bacteria into the body itself, and they tend to cause problems in the hocks, especially in Cornish cross. That is my working hypothesis. Notice I didn't say theory, because that is my pet peeve when people say theory instead of hypothesis. But so that could be it. If it was one chicken, probably a stargazer. And the stargazers will have that twisted neck. They call them stargazers because it always looks like they're looking up at the stars, even though you usually see them in daylight. But anyway, so Kevin, I don't know if that helps, but look up viral arthritis. A lot of times when you see them with their legs out in front of them, that's what that is. Do you have anything to add to that, Mike?
No, not really. I think, knowing how many that are affected in the flock, if it's just that 1 or 2 or like out of 100 or something, that's just move on, usually pretty safe. Yeah. It's not, sometimes that happens, but if it starts creeping up to be like 5-10% of your flock, then, it's getting something to be concerned about and hard to figure it out. But
hey, Ginger and David had a question.
So they want to ask, how has the plucker door and exit chute changed your processing? So let me just set up what that is first, Spence, and you can talk about it.
Go for it.
So Spence bought a 35-inch plucker with a door on it, and the door on the Poultry Man is mechanical, so it's not automated. And that's intentional. Eli's not going to ever change it, no matter how much you tell him. The Ashleys are nicer with the automated timer. So that's and they spit that out into a receiving table. And we kind of built Spence's table to be a height that he was comfortable working on, and the plucker matches it. So he's working, he's emptying the birds out of the chute, and you just pull the handle, open the door, and the centrifugal force of the birds spit out on the table. And then he does some prep work there and moves them on down the line. So that's the general idea of how it's working.
Yeah. And so one thing that we did is we put the door on the wrong side. So I'm going to have to get with the welder. Because right now, if we just open up the door, they shoot out onto the floor and get condemned. So we actually have a sheet pan. My son holds up a sheet pan. It's like, as all these chickens pop them. And then they stay on the table. We're going to weld either that, or we'll probably just weld like a panel, a stainless steel panel on there. So how has it changed the processing, Ginger? It's cut out a person. So you think like when you do 1,200 chickens, and we have been getting a lot of big chickens, like especially for retail, people are like, everybody, most folks would know this. Processing is a fixed cost. And so if you send small birds, big birds, the whole bird market has been kind of wiped out because one, it's summer, so people aren't roasting chickens. And then two, all the restaurants are shut down. And that's where usually most of your whole birds go, at least in our part of the country. And they cut them up because that's the economical way for them to do it and do what they do. So everybody needs to do cut-ups, which stinks from the plant perspective because we got beef, pork, we're just swamped. We're booking into, I think, December of 2020 or 2021 if you're trying to get a cow in, by the way. So so what that's done is it's taken that guy that had to pick one chicken up. We had to pick 2 chickens up or however many at a time. So if you have 1,200 chickens and say they're an average 5-pound dress out, 1,200 times 5 is 6,000 pounds. That meant that someone had to pick up 6,000 pounds of chicken, put it on a table. So right there, we saved someone picking up 3 tons of chicken, which fatigue on the employees. And that's greatly helped. And then just taking that step out, it's just you flip a latch and boom. So instead of something taking, I don't know how long will it take? 4 seconds a chicken, or depending on how big. If they're big, you can't do more than one really. And your back being bent over. So you think of 12,000 or not 12,000 one day, 1,200 times 4 seconds. Like that's time that's saved. It's an employee who's making how much ever an hour, in that. So yeah, it's just that automation would be where I think. And I will say, Mike, you talked about the Ashleys, which I'm not super familiar with, but you said they had an automatic timer. I do not want an automatic timer because the great thing about the way we have it is I have it so it's set up. The top of the plucker is probably about my chin height. And so I can see over in those as they're bouncing up. And sometimes I need to stay a little longer. The difference between the wash table being buried and it going, after everything's out, they're just boom, 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 like where they're just taking the inside out. They're not having to pick a bunch of wing feathers and that. The difference is the scald, but it's also the pluck. And one thing I didn't like about our old tub style plucker was that it was on a timer. So this way, especially the bigger birds, they're a little sturdier. Man, I'll just run them. They don't fall apart. We might have an extra broken wing every now and again, but I'll run them longer because the savings on labor when people are on payroll, you're paying several $100s an hour. So it's like, man, that's the ticket. So those are some of the ways that it's really helped, Ginger. I don't know if that's clear or not. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah. And so basically what you're saying there with the pluck time is as you go through your day, like the pluck duration can be variable, right? 30 seconds might work one time, but later in the day, it might need to be 35 or 40 because the scald just changes a little bit as you go through the day, right?
And Mike's has a hose on the top. It's better than the other one we had. It's like a nozzle. And at first it was putting too much water. One thing we did, if you're looking at that, something nice we did was the other plucker, we had a crate and it would catch feathers. And this is something else, Ginger. And we would have to change that crate like every 3 minutes. Someone would have to pick up a crate of wet feathers and heads, that would get pulled off and dump it. We don't have to do that anymore. I got this set up and it worked out perfect. It was kind of serendipity. We didn't plan it, but it just worked out great. We ended up taking the 55 gallon barrels. We use them as gut barrels throughout the plant. I just took a Sawzall and cut a notch out. There's a notch at the bottom of Mike's plucker. And then I took a hammer drill and drilled holes around the bottom and at the very bottom and on the side. And so one of those barrels will hold 600 birds worth of feathers, or like 4 Freedom Rangers if you do Freedom Rangers. But like for Cornish cross, you can put like 600 Cornish cross feathers worth on there. We did redbirds one day and we did not have enough barrels. Anyways, and so that's another thing, you think of hauling, dumping all those wet feathers. This, we just roll the barrel, push it over like 15 foot, and then slide the other one under and we're good to go. So that's another thing.
We got one from Brian and Meredith.
So, and they said, we'll be starting out. What's the number one resource that you use or wish you had used when you started out? What do you think there, Mike?
So it's a hard question. I think, I think I've talked about this in one of my shows before, but I think one of the number one resources that I managed to find was APPPA.
Pastured Poultry Talk podcast, right?
Well, that came after I forgot what I knew. I get every day I get to learn what I don't know. But when I just started out, I didn't really produce and raise any chickens before I came into APPPA. I mean, that's not quite true. I raised some hens and stuff before that, but when I started like actually raising meat birds and trying to think about selling them and things like that, APPPA was one of the first resources I pulled, and that just plugging in, that led me into connections with people like Jeff and people. I tried to find the people who were smarter than me is what I want to say there. And that was my resource. So, and I still kind of work under that model. I still try to find the people who are smarter than me, like Spence here. That's why he's on the live stream tonight. But
it's hard for Mike to find people smarter than him. Not so much for me.
Well, that's very flattering. But so that's the resource that's the resource for me. What about you, Spence?
Well, I'm flattering you, Mike, to get discounts on poultry processing equipment, if that's not obvious. I think APPPA is a terrific place. And, the big thing is always just to find those people smarter than you. I don't know what Greg Gunthorpe or Jeff Maddox does. Like, it's lonely at the top, I guess. But no, seriously, or Dave. Maybe Dave just talks to Ginger. That's what Dave does down there in Florida. But yeah, there's some amazing people in APPPA, and that's APPPA.org. There's a listserv there. It really is like other people. I charge $100 an hour, and I'm not nearly as active as I used to be on it. But you get thousands of dollars worth of consulting advice for free on APPPA, just because everybody's kind of in it to win it. Mike, you just did a series, right, on Pastured Poultry Talk, kind of going through some of the basics, and that would be worth it, Meredith and Ryan.
Pastured Poultry Talk, starting with episode 104. And you can catch them on Apple Podcasts, Google, or Spotify, or you can visit the webpage. My approach is not necessarily the checklist approach. I like to teach like what you should know and kind of why you would know it, so then you can make decisions about when things go wrong, or actually make decisions about what to do. So there's a lot of like, you should do this, but there's also a lot of, this is why, or this is what's happening kind of stuff. And that's kind of my approach when I talk about it. But this is going to be episode 6 here, kind of a cap off to that series, some questions. So if you've listened to that series, feel free to ask questions related to those other episodes or anything else that Spence and I have talked about on our shows. More than happy to do. But that's a good series. And just plugging in with people who Spence said are in it to win it. It's hard to find good information.
Yeah. And I was telling someone the other day, I've got a friend, and and we do a lot of stuff together for education and that, and in our church. But I was telling him, hey, when I have problems, I'm kind of at the point where I don't call any, the people that I would call would be like Jeff or you to bounce stuff off, but I don't, like I'm at a point now where I don't use anything from the government so, or extension or anything. That's nothing against them, but you want to talk to people who make a living doing this, because it is a radically different thing than what you're going to read in, any puffy magazine piece. Brian and Meredith, a little piece of advice before you get started: book dates with probably natural state processing. They're in Clinton, Arkansas. So I would, before you start anything, you guys need to work with your processing dates. If you're not planning on doing it yourself, you may want to think about doing your own processing. And I know a guy who sells processing equipment. I also have a tub plucker, if you guys, that can be refurbed, that I'll sell you for cheap, just because, I like the Navy. Not really, but I think Meredith, was in the Navy. So, but yeah, right. So hopefully that helps, guys. Let's see. And then Dan had a question.
We got Dan. Dan is joining us from somewhere in Australia. Sorry, I know it's a big place, but I don't know exactly where, Dan. But he wants to know more about value adds, what you're doing, what you see others doing market-wise. It seems more and more producers are heading in this direction, and whole birds are less and less the core business. What do you think, Spence? I mean, give us,
yeah.
If you have a thought on percentage of your sales that are value add, let's start there, and then you can kind of talk about your philosophy, and I can talk about what I do, because it's probably radically different, and what I see kind of happening community wide.
So the biggest thing, the challenge, right, is to sell birds, and I think Dan kind of nailed it with whole birds. But so Dan, there's a couple things, like whole birds, you saturate that market pretty quick. And if you're doing it, you probably already realize that. So then you move to cut-ups, and cut-ups is just a way of moving more birds. You can look at it like we will make more money per doing cut-ups, and you can price accordingly. We make probably a little bit more. The problem with cut-ups is that you start getting stuck with individual parts. Like, man, last year it was beautiful, guys, because I had everything sold. My frames were getting sold to a ramen place in Tulsa. My wings were going to a couple different. I was selling to a DoubleTree restaurant up in Bentonville, which is where the Walmart headquarters were. So everything had a place. Thighs, you will not have a problem selling. Breasts, at least in my market, you won't have. There are always elderly white women that want 1 pound chicken breasts, and you can build, like, honestly, I get $10 a pound for a chicken breast, which is crazy to me, that people like our stuff that much. So you can kind of build in there, like, certain cuts pay for everything, and then the cuts that you're going to have problems selling, if you can find ways of selling it, that just kind of ups it from that whole bird. I shoot kind of for $2 net a bird, and when I say net, that accounts for like all my labor and everything, right? So, but you're rapidly going to finish all that. So that's when we step into stuff like chicken sausage. So chicken sausage is a great relief valve. One, it's a way of taking a bird that's like, I know scale probably doesn't work on the screen, but if you take you say you didn't get all your chickens processed, which happens to us because I'll get other people in the plant, people are in emergencies, and I'll push my batches back, or the weather. Like you get a really pretty week in summer, and all of a sudden your birds jump like 2 weeks worth of growth in 6 days because it's 85 degrees because it's been kind of rainy and cloudy. And so the chicken sausage one is kind of a management valve. If your birds get too big, you're not trying to sell someone one chicken breast that weighs 2 pounds, which is pretty easy to happen to you on a Cornish cross when you're doing it at scale. The other thing that you can do is I can take, a 7 pound chicken dressed, which is a big chicken. That's why you need Mike's heavy duty, large kill cones from Poultry Man that don't rip like the other brands that are supposed to have lifetime guarantees.
This is not a commercial.
It is. If y'all knew the amount of work Mike does, Mike, it should be a commercial for Mike. So, but anyway, so you take all that, and you can get 3 pounds of sausage. So 3 pounds of sausage are, you sell that for $10 a pound, you won't have a problem selling it because it's chicken sausage, and it's not stuff where they've ground up the frames or done stuff like that, which is what we sell as dog food, is what most people sell as the commercial chicken sausage. So, you can add stuff like skin to boost your fat content. That's something that maybe you weren't selling, or you were selling for 50 cents a pound or $1 a pound for frames. The other thing that when you make chicken sausage is you can add 5% by weight of chicken hearts. And so I don't know what you guys sell chicken hearts for, but you probably don't sell them for $10 a pound. And so up to 5% by weight, it adds good texture. The other thing when you do chicken sausage, we've got several varieties that we do. And if you're really interested, contact me, fightingfarmerspence@gmail.com. We're starting to sell spice mixes for folks. We're not quite there yet, but if you want to try some of it, but you can take, if I take, like, we have a yellow curry ginger sausage where we use fresh ginger. And so, like, I buy ginger for $4 a pound, grate it up, and then I sell it for 10. So I'm like doubling my money on my ginger. When you add garlic, there's stuff you do, like you use dried minced onion or stuff like that, because it absorbs water weight. There's all kinds of stuff on that. So there's chicken sausage, which is great. But you really have to have a processor that'll work with you, because our markets do not want crazy spice mixes. Most spice mixes are not geared towards to your customers. And so that's why we've kind of went and redesigned our own. The other thing that you can do, things like dog food, people will, if you can find people that feed raw, there are people that will pay more money to feed their pets than they will for themselves or their families, which morally, I don't know, but like profit wise, yay, we're all about. And so, and that's fine. Just do what you want to, the one thing we found too is just running the frames. They're fairly easy on a grinder. So running the frames and packaging it into a small chub. And that's the other thing, right? Like that chicken sausage does is it takes that big chicken. I don't know if I finished that thought that I started earlier. It takes that huge chicken and you turn it into 3 1-pound chubs. So instead of having a chicken that's the size of a watermelon, you take it, you put it in 3 little 1-pound chubs that you can fit like 60 in a case. And so it's a good storage mechanism too. Broth is something, if you have, broth is not USDA inspected as long as it's under, I think, 2% by weight chicken. Most people won't give you any guff over it. So if you have a commercial kitchen, you can make broth. And as long as you sell it under this is for people in the States. So I don't know about you, Dan. But that's a great way of transforming stuff. We sell some broth. I thought it would be better. Granted, it's summer. So, but we'll see what it's like in the winter. The other thing with broth is we have to freeze it. We don't want a Tetra Pak, but that's a whole other thing. So those are some of the things for value added. So pet food, chicken sausage, smoking is an option. We do hot wings. So something you can do in your plant, super easy, especially if they do pork, is you can add hot sauce. There's some hot sauces that look for one that's just, I think Louisiana hot sauce is just chilies, salt, vinegar. I think that's red chili, salt, vinegar, which is what you want on your label, because your customers are not going to want sugar. And that's, same with sausages, right? And so if you have anybody that does any type of wet ham production and like a pork processor, if you can talk them into putting the chicken wings in they should have like a vacuum thing, and that'll help draw that hot sauce into the actual wing, and then you could package hot sauce wings. At some point I'm going to do like a Thai or Vietnamese style fish sauce wing. I think that'll sell well too. But the problem there is kind of some of the crazy ingredients, MSG being the main one in fish sauce. So, but those are some ideas, Dan. I don't know if that helps, but that'll give you something to start on.
And I would just say that I think from the broader picture, value add is definitely the way it's going. I think it's kind of natural. It has to evolve into that value added processing space in order to get more mainstream adoption. You know, the whole bird market is not really there commercially. I mean, like in the grocery stores here where I'm at least, you know, people shop for breasts or thighs or whatever. And all those things that Spence said, I think is what that's starting to emerge. More and more people are starting to take that approach and really kind of reinvent what some of that value adding looks like, and not just go to the cut up. That's the first step. I just sold boneless breast in one-off packages for the first time this spring in about 10 years. Because I like to, my idea of value add was I'll cut it, I'll do anything you want to it, but you're going to get the whole chicken. And that doesn't always work.
Piece cut up, and
and I'm okay with that. You know, I don't need to sell a lot of chicken, but that was my approach. But hopefully that helps, Dan.
Yeah. One other thing, be careful of stuff like boneless thighs. And even like what Mike was talking about, pick one type of chicken breast and run with it, because what'll happen is you'll start running out of inventory. So you'll have, once you go people will buy an endless amount of boneless thighs from you, but then you lose, I used to know it, like 20% maybe. How much is a thigh bone? Like 20% of the weight. So you got to upcharge. But the thing is, you could sell as many thighs probably as you could boneless thighs. You know, so don't add stuff unless you saturate it. So when you first start off, don't start cutting up, just sell whole birds. And then once you feel like, okay, I've saturated the market, then move into cut ups. But when you add stuff and then you don't have it, you lose customers, or you create like customers that aren't happy. So work on keeping that consistent supply and then add things on slowly. You know, Rome wasn't built in a day, or wherever. You know, like and whatever the saying, pick a saying, you get it, right? But fast is foolish, slow is wise when it comes to building your business. Because a lot of pasture poultry farms, and this is how Carla and I describe it, we'll have competition and they're flash in the pans. That's a term we use, flash in the pans. We'll call it a FIP. How about that? Because we got some military folks on here. But these FIPs, they're here and then they're gone in a year. And just do one thing, do it well, or at least profitably, and then continue to build on that. So that's my only thought. But let's call it good on the.
Yeah. Cool. And
all right,
Dave has another one here. We'll just flash this up here and then we'll come back to Elizabeth. Can Canadians join APPPA?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we allow them in.
No, we need them because Canadians cancel out people like me and Mike.
There's
people like Canadians.
There's a nice depending on where you're at in the provinces. There's a developing pasture poultry market there, and there's some opportunities, and especially in Ontario, I think has some different programs that are making it more accessible. But yeah, we have Canadian members, not a lot. You know, we are still burdened by our name a lot of times, but we do oddly enough raise poultry in both countries and do it on pasture and have a lot of things in common. So
maybe one day, Mike, you guys will call it NAPA, the North American Pasture Poultry, and then people will come to us for car parts and pasture poultry advice.
I think that's thinking too small, Spence. So Elizabeth has a question here, talking about processing. Are you indoor, outdoor, USDA inspected? She wants to hear about wastewater disposal, septic, spray field, sewer. I'm outdoor, and I just run it off.
You are not a USDA inspected?
No.
Yeah.
I would be exempt more than likely.
Yeah. Likely. I'm going to tell those USDA hall monitors about you. Get them off the case, Mike.
Spence is USDA, and I'm sure he
indoor septic. Yeah. Just running off septic, which works great until someone stuffs a whole cow liver down a drain.
So you have a regular septic system there. Do you actually get that pumped on a regular basis, or do you have that? Does that have to be cleaned out on a more frequently than like a residential one?
I mean, it's a big one. Scott put in a big one. So, do the stuff out in the country. in Arkansas is really good.
Yeah. If you have a specific question there, Ann, just bring it back into the comments and we can tackle it. But it's important. I think I'll say this on inspecting. It's important that our communities start with what's available to them, and that's the PL 9492 exemptions, which is out of the Poultry Processing Inspection Act. I think that's called the PPIA. There's exemptions carved into that regulation that allows producers to process on farm and still put those birds into sale in certain ways. And some states can influence that, make it more restrictive, but that's a really great way to start if you can. And then we also need folks like Spence who are scaling up the USDA side. So there's two sides of that equation. Both of them are very, very important for the health of our industry or of our community. Yeah.
And Susan added some comments. Dan, she said about raw pet foods, and Susan knows a lot. She's a veterinarian. She said one of the gurus of feeding raw food, fresh and raw foods, is in Australia. So that would probably be a you, Susan, thing. And also Susan is a board member of APPPA, and she is Canadian. So and a very just generally wonderful person. So if you're a member of APPPA, just put, and if you're not, sign up, and then you can talk to Susan, or just find Susan, Susan Beal, Beal. I'm sure you can find her online and that. So, but she's great. So Elizabeth, she asked how big the septic tank it is. About 95% of the time it's big enough. That's all I know.
And the reason you don't know that is because the plant was built red meat by the guy who built it. He came in after the fact as a partner to put in poultry. So you weren't there for all the details.
Yeah. Occasionally I am there with a bucket though. On a really bad day. The other thing with Susan, she's looking at doing a USDA poultry facility. So I've been getting this question a lot. Here's my thoughts on, okay. So for USDA, Susan, take them or leave them, they're free. All right. One, check right now for grants that USDA is pushing new processing plants to open up. So there's grants. I know Missouri just did a thing where they're giving $200,000 grants for state facility for all processors to try to expand processing capacity. There's some talk of like, how do we get that to go in Arkansas? For my partner and I were talking about that. It won't affect me, but man, he could spend that $200,000 like that. The other thing on that, Elizabeth, look heavily. I would take a very strong look into it. Getting set up for deer. So deer are custom processed. You could shut your USDA plant down during deer season in Pennsylvania, which I imagine is probably about as popular as it is here in Arkansas. And like, I don't understand why like cutting up your own meat is such a big deal. It's a deer, but apparently it is. And you can make some bank on that. And you could probably make enough bank, to be honest, if you did it right, to where you could pay for most of the expenses of infrastructure expenses of your plant for probably a good portion of the year just off deer season. That's actually a model that I know several folks, including my partner, have done. So you can make a lot of money processing deer, drop the inspection. The other thing to consider, so we do red meat and poultry in the plant. And something that you're going to struggle with poultry is in the wintertime. Like how are you going to keep the plant full? Because what's going to happen, and I'm going to give you some ideas here too. So the other thing that you got to look at is like your labor force. So it sounds good to shut down for a USDA plant. Well, we'll just shut down over the winter. You're going to lose your labor force, and that's going to kill you. Because finding good employees is really difficult, which you probably already know. So something that Scott, my partner, does with that poultry rate of inspection, because you'll have that where you can process USDA poultry. He actually does a lot of repacking. I mean, by the pallet. He does tons and tons of stuff of like chicken fingers, that kind of stuff. for people that they're buying seconds from like Tyson or whatever, by the semi load. They're bringing them to the plant. And when we're not killing chickens on the chicken floor, we're packaging chickens. They're repackaging private label on that stuff. So that's an idea, but you got to figure out a way. How do I keep product moving through that plant? Even if it's just to keep your employees paid. Deer season, repackaging, people will probably find you once they realize you have a poultry writ of inspection. And some of those things are, can float your plant. So it's going to be hard to do just poultry with your plant and make a good living. And there's a plant in North Carolina called Mount Pilot, I think. Is that correct, Mike? Do you remember them? The North Carolina USDA plant?
Yeah, they're not in business anymore.
Exactly.
And I would just say, Elizabeth, I'm not sure where in Southeast PA you are, but I'm in Pennsylvania, and so it's always interesting and relevant to keep tabs on those options, because up until last year, we haven't had a USDA processor in plant or in state after Eberly shut down. So
that's the other thing. If you do poultry, one thing for me, and I'm kind of still struggling, Carla and I talk about the ethical implications of this, but like I had to call a guy who was saying, hey, it's kind of a weird call, but he's like, hey, my church gave me some land and they're going to fund me to start a pasture poultry operation. They already kind of do this with cows. And they're like, we want you to come. We want to come to your farm. We know you're busy. Let's set some time up so we can come to your farm, see how you do things. And we want to start like doing what you do in the same town. And then we want you to kill the birds. Sound great? And I'm like, no. So like one thing with having your own plant is it is kind of a way of controlling competition. And it's like, if you're going to compete for my customers, like, why are you? No. I don't think there's anything ethically wrong with that, but I do a lot of out of state. So I try to focus on Tulsa in our area. So we've got some really good processing customers there, Stillwater, down in Little Rock. And it's a way for me to kind of maintain the turf and not get any more turf wars because it's a fairly limited market. We only have 250,000 people in our area. And it's the second biggest area in the state. So having the processing plant also kind of gives me the keys to that, and it's like, you can still compete against me. Just do your own processing plant thing.
Cool. Let's see. We'll just catch up some stuff here. Sue said Greg developed a plan for wastewater disposal. Greg has the constructed wetland, and he's done some webinars about that, some presentations about that. I think his webinar is on the Niche Meat Processors Assistance Network. And I wrote a story probably 6-7 years ago now, whenever he was on the board, which has probably been 6 years ago, maybe 8. I'm not sure. Pretty interesting read. Greg's a smart cat.
Something else, Mike, to kind of fill the time, if people have any last minute questions, is, we'll probably talk about this on the next podcast we do, if people find value in it, is just making hay from chickens, which is interesting because we just purchased this new farm, right? The Riverland. And because of some eminent domain stuff going on there, way to go, government. We can't really get started on it, and the contractors are taking their time. They're running a water line through the property, and a 2-foot water line, they're taking about 150 foot, it seems like, of easement. But we're kind of looking at the hay business. We're doing the cattle stuff. But one thing to keep in mind as you guys start your Meredith, Brian, as you guys start your pasture poultry, is you're going to have a lot of grass. and that grass is wonderful, and then it's going to start becoming a problem. So either plan on having ruminants, plan on doing some type of hay, but you're going to have a way to keep that grass under control. And brush hogging really isn't. It's just kind of a temporary solution, and the grass just compounds and gets worse and worse. I think there is a part of pasture poultry that is about nutrient management. You can build soil, but at some point you're always bringing in grain and you're always leaving more in the soil than you're taking away. Because that little Cornish cross, best case scenario, has a 2-to-1, feed conversion. Or, if you're not doing a great job, it may have a 4-to-1. But but you're bringing in 4 pounds of grain onto your pasture, 4 pounds of nutrients, and you're taking 1 pound of chicken off. Or 1 pound of grain is leaving, I guess would be the way to look at it. So that's just something long term. And we've talked about that a lot on the podcast about the making hay or, maybe grazing cattle. So my wife says she likes the podcast, so that's enough for me. All right. Seth has a question.
Yeah. So Seth is asking if anyone does fermented feed on pasture. Interestingly enough, not sure, it'll probably hit within the next week or so. I have an interview with a gentleman in the Pacific Northwest, so out there in Washington State, who did a SARE grant for some fermented feed. And I won't give away too much, but he actually has some valuable numbers and some data to share, and it's a pretty interesting setup and results. And so I think it opened my eyes. I was kind of surprised. I should tell you probably which way the data goes. It was fascinating. He found value in it in his trial. It improved some things, and I think there's still a lot of nuance to fermented feed, but I think it can and does work in different situations, and part of it has to be kind of figuring out if you're able to do it and make it work for you.
Yeah.
It's not a magic
It
bullet.
would be a disaster on our farm, Mike. Like,
yeah.
For us, there'd be mushrooms growing out of the feed if we tried it. So usually the only fermented feed we do is when a tornado blows through and rips some tarps off. So, but
yep, let's go with Dave's question here. Non-GMO versus organic versus regular feed. Big difference. Customers prefer one or the other. So my take on the feed situation is you should buy the absolute best quality feed that you can, regardless of what it's made of. Because you can buy some really good feeds that are conventionally formulated. The idea here is actually you're shopping on the quality of the feed formulation and the ingredients inside of that feed. I prefer organic. I'm not really a non-GMO person because I think there's too much middle ground and too much unknowns with non-GMO. I think it's a catch-all term. It's kind of like free range or pasture access. It just means a whole lot of nothing.
And I agree. And we sell non-GMO poultry, so or fed non-GMO feed. I've tried actually pricing out, Mike, the conventional, and we can't get some component. We can't get conventional soybean meal, so it doesn't like my cost on. It would save like 3 cents. Mike and I actually looked at potentially doing pullets here in the Midwest. And one of the things we were looking at to get costs down, where we would raise out kind of like how Moyers or them do. Mike sells pullets too, if you need them. But we were looking at running them in chicken houses and that. And my feed company, it's like it came in way too high. And so it's like, well, let's drop down conventional feed. And it didn't drop the price at all because they can't get all the stuff we need. So I do non-GMO because that's the best ration I can get. Ideally, and I'm kind of like Mike, I'm more concerned about the quality of the feed. I can't do organic in Arkansas because of my price points. I mean, it's interesting, Mike. Carla and I talk a lot. Carla does the deliveries. And it's been really neat to get out and make deliveries. And I hear this a lot from Carla, and I do them when she can't do them or needs a day off. The people, our customers at Across the Creek Farm, are not people with tons of money. I mean, they are people that look like they don't look like us. We've got a very diverse group of folks. A lot of ethnicities and all kinds of age and all that. But their homes look like our homes, like a lot of modest homes. It's like they don't have like super corporate jobs. In fact, Carla was telling me the story of people in corporate America are the ones that try to like negotiate the price down. And it's like, bro, you're making like 6 digits. And you live in Arkansas. Stop it. Like, come on, man. We're not going to buy your chicken breast because it's too expensive for us. It's like, okay,
Right.
later, Gator. Yeah. So price is a big deal for me. I think that's less like if you're in California, that's less of an issue. If you're in, if you're maybe up in the Northeast, where there's more people and cost of living's a little higher. So, but those are just some of my things. The other thing about organic, you can sell all the organic feed you want. Your birds will not be certified organic unless you have a certified organic processor. And good luck finding that,
Yeah, and just I would just say on that feed, so here, and I talked about this, so I won't rehash it too much, but I have bad experiences with the non-GMO feed land, just not getting what I expected, and discovering it. But the broilers this year, we went back to a conventional feed because I'm just, it's for me, it's one or the other. I'm okay with either one in a lot of cases. Preference for my family is organic, but if I'm trying to reach out and broaden the market, just the conventional feed is what I went with because, we have a very similar demographic here to what you got, Spence. It's rural, and price sensitivity is a real thing. And now my turkeys, when the turkeys come in on Monday, they're going to go organic feed all the way from day one because I'm not going to trust that is the best quality feed I can get is the organic one for my turkeys and the starter. So, and I trust that formulation from Fertrell with, I just trust it.
Yeah.
So that's, and that's where we're going to go with that. So that's just a decision. Some perspectives. I guess.
And it's going to vary, right, Mike? So organic is more of an option up north because of field peas and like your protein source in the South, you're kind of limited to soybeans, realistically as to what will grow locally. As you get up north, you have field peas. Like there's some things that regionally make it more viable, like triticale. I don't know if that's how you say it. It's a higher protein, I think, wheat. So, but there's regionally, there's going to be more options depending on where you're at. So that's also going to factor into the mills. Ideally, moving forward in the future, I want to grind our own feed on the farm. I've got the labor. I can teach Drew as our farm manager. I think that's something he'd be really interested in. And because one thing with feed that you have to consider, especially bagged feed and that kind of stuff. I know Dave just mentioned he gets bagged feed. Is age of the feed, especially in summertime. So, because your feed will go stale, the fats in it, especially if you're using a full fat soybean, go rancid, your gains drop. So if you can grind that feed, from that whole grain, which stores much, much better, you'll see a lot of bump ups. You'll be able to more fine tune. And in that case, a conventional on-farm milled with like Fertrell minerals, Fertrell is really the only mineral company I trust from experience. So if you were to do that, that's going to be better than any bagged feed, organic or bionet. I don't know, whatever that it is, So regionally, that's going to play part of it. Yeah,
and I know when soy-free feed is still pretty popular and it's growing in popularity, but I always figure, when I was trying to decide about that stuff, I'm like, well, if I got to truck all my ingredients in from, the other coast or thousands of miles, what value does that have? There's a trade-off in my mind, and not saying it would never import those ingredients, but I think there's something to be said for working within the system that you have, and there's a cost, there's a footprint, impact there as well. So,
and soy-free, if they screw up soy-free, you are hosed. Because that thing, that is a fine-tuned feed right there. If it's not just right, you're going to be paying out of your pocket. Besides the fact it's expensive.
Yep. So let's catch up some of these here. Sue, going back to your nutrient problem, Spence, who said you can provide a service in leasing land for grazing or doing custom grazing. That way you don't have to actually own the animals, the hoof stock.
Well, Mike, I've talked to people about that, and grass-fed cattle farmers are some of the cheapest folks I know. And so I talked to, and they're the best ones in Arkansas that do it. And they're like, well, why don't you lease it to us? And I'm like, okay, well, what are you thinking? And they're like, they gave me it was lower than what I pay the land rent per acre on. And I'm like, so I'm supposed to supply you with water. I'm going to give up a chunk of my field. And then your cows are probably at some point going to get out and go eat all the baked chicken pate as they burst through my pens. It's like, heck no. So I think that it could potentially be a possibility. My experience in my area is, the amount of money, a factor to consider is how much money, what's the profitability potential per acre, and like leasing land to a bunch of cheap cattle farmers. At least Archie cattle farmers, I'd be paying for the privilege. And then they complain all the time. Grass-fed people complain all the time. Like, raise chickens, man. Loosen up.
Then we got a comment there from Chuck. He loves the podcast, enjoys the podcast, I should say. Thanks, Chuck. Thanks for listening.
Right in the fields, Chuck.
Dave Aspinall says he loves both podcasts, so there's some feedback. And then we got an egg washing question, looking for equipment. Yeah.
So, I think a good place is, I use a Gibson egg washer. And it just mounts on a sink. It's like, about $1,000. It's good enough up to 500 chickens, 600 chickens. There's the Aqua Magic, which are like the crazy expensive ones. There's a new one, right, Mike, that I can't remember the name of it. I see it advertised in APPPA. It's kind of a mid-range from the Gibson. I think the Cadmans have it.
Yeah, I'm trying to get his name. It's William Burkholder in Virginia, and it's
you should sponsor your show. Then it right off, right? It's in the APPPA. You'll see ads for it. It's kind of a mid-price. Do you remember about what they run? It's like $4,000.
Yeah, I think he's probably about 5, give or take a few there.
Yeah, but it has the graders where it grades out eggs. I think the attachment's got fans, which is really important for drying. The Gibson Ridge, we just have a towel we lay them out on, then we have to repack it. So if you're more serious about eggs than we are, look at him. He's diving into the archives. That would be the brand, and Mike's about to find it. So
the Power Scrub.
That's it. Power Scrub, Gibson. There it is. That's high technology right there. And Gibson, that's, I think, GIB. Is it GIBSON? Gibson Ridge. They're out of Ohio. And it's just an old 50 style thing that they brought back. They work really well. That, it just plugs right into just get a sink, and it'll work. You can do it in your kitchen. All right.
Cool.
And I think that's about it.
Yeah, let's call it there. Thanks everybody for jumping in here. It's fun. Thanks, Spence, for giving us a whirl. Maybe we'll do it again.
Yeah. Yeah. Any activities or anything? Anything coming up that folks to look forward to, Mike? Any pullets? If people fall pullets, is that
sold out? Yeah, no need to
sold
ask.
Out. Yeah, they're all going to Arkansas.
I would love to have another 4,000 of them, but I don't. Pullet
what
business.
About spring?
Pullet, yeah, spring. I still have. Should be April. I don't have that time frame nailed down yet, but expect some in April. And I'm actually here's the
Blow
news.
his inbox up.
I'm actually
go ahead, Mike.
Here's the news. In May, I think end of May, I will have soy-free full beak pullets raised non-GMO feed for trail management. So
boom,
good stuff.
There you have it. Yeah.
So there's
all the pullets.
No fall pullets. So yeah,
that's like you doing boneless thighs. You realize that you don't have a market, Mike. You need to go back and listen to the beginning of the stream. You can't fill the pullet market, and you're doing all these highfalutin, no soy.
I can fill it.
That is your boneless thigh.
Yeah, Let me tell you about. Well, we'll talk about margin some other day.
True.
There's this thing called competition. I got a mortgage.
Yeah, maybe it's not your. Okay, I stand corrected.
And then of course we're trying to plan the APPPA conference. So not sure what that looks like. Plug your show, Spence. Where do we get the Fighting Farmer?
Just wherever you get podcasts, and at some point we'll get together and record another one.
Yep, and you can
before Christmas.
Before Christmas, yep. And you can find Pastured Poultry Talk at pasturepultrytalk.com, and it'll get you to wherever you need to go. And we got some exciting episodes coming out. Next one is on soy-free, or not soy-free.
Pullets.
It's on fermentation.
Soy-free pullets. Oh, there you go.